Alright, so I'm back with the recording, and I've got my 2 layers of stones all laid out. The last thing I need is I'll just create another layer, and I can actually reorder it here with these guys, move layers up and down. I'm going to turn these off. I'm going to turn the grid off. I don't need that either. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to need to finish it off with some grout. So I'm going to grab another plane, just like before, make it a polymesh, turn off smooth, divide it so I've got some polygons to play with here. And I've already got an alpha, just a fairly generic alpha that I've made. Back in the tool menu, I'm going to say masking. I'm just going to say mask by alpha. I'll hit Control H to hide that mask. Go to our deformation palette, and I'm just going to inflate this plane a little bit. That's pretty good. So just like before, I'm going to rotate it and then hold Shift to constrain it to face the camera. I'm going to hit F. I should note that this alpha is already tiling too. This is an alpha I made that's completely tileable. So, and if I just hit T to leave edit mode, that's now on this layer. So I've got this sort of final layer of grout. So at this stage, I'm not going to worry about poly painting it too much, because we'll take a look at cleaning that up in Photoshop in another video. But what I can do is just select the simple brush, and I'm going to just a little bit of a harder fall off, and I'm just going to increase my draw size. I'll make sure only RGB or mRGB is on. I don't want to add any depth to the canvas. And I'm just going to pick just some kind of color to give it for now. Maybe a little bit lighter. And the final thing I'll do at this stage is again hold the tilde key, and I can start just offsetting it around in the canvas to kind of find out sort of where it needs to be. I can also start moving it up and down by holding the Alt key and the tilde key, and I can sort of get it to be where I want, sort of in Z-space. So that's definitely an area that I don't like that's coming up through the rocks. What we can do to fix some of that stuff is I'm going to switch my tool over to the single layer brush, and I'm going to make sure I've got a low Z intensity and a soft fall off for this as well. And if I change it to Z sub, then what I can do is I can start just pushing a little bit of that grout back and just fix up a little bit of these problem areas here, so it's not coming through my stones. The other thing I can do is I can set it to add, and I can also just start gently pulling it up. So if maybe I want some more grout coming up through some areas in particular, I can do that. I'll pull it up more than I need to, because I'll go and sort of knock it back later to fix it. So just trying to fill in some of these corners. So we'll just keep doing that, and you keep refining it. Then of course you go back in with Z sub and maybe a smaller brush and start knocking it back, and kind of leave it in some of the cracks though. So speaking of trouble areas, at this stage, once we've got everything laid out, if there is something that sort of stands out as being too repetitive, like maybe these 2 stones here, for instance, they're the same stone and they're kind of right next to it. Actually, that's 3 times. That's probably not good. But there's a couple of things we can do at this stage to sort of do the final push to finish. One is, and we probably want to do this on duplicates of these layers too, actually. So that's the layer I'm going to want, because let's say this is the problem stone here. I'm going to duplicate it, send it all the way to the end, and hide the original. I always want to keep the originals because, well, if you make a mistake, you can go back to it. So with the eraser tool selected, if I wanted to, I could really carefully, and I could zoom in up here into the canvas. I could really carefully erase this particular stone and then redraw out another one in its place. That's one particular type of fix. And if I hit actual again to go back to my view, I can get back. The other thing I can do is just kind of that trick we saw earlier. If I wanted to, I could drag out, you know, another stone, kind of put it in some kind of orientation, and just kind of float it through a little bit. See if there's a way that I can kind of get these two to sort of come together and be one. Sometimes that's a good fix. Maybe that's enough, or maybe I could do it again just a little bit right there, or maybe not. But that's one particular option there, just to break it up. The other thing we can do, and this isn't always natural looking, we can actually, well, let me undo that. We can actually, instead of having Z add on, we can have Z sub on. And I can draw that out. Let me find its position. Oh, that's on another layer. And I can actually use this stone to subtract information from the canvas. It's a little bit sensitive, but there we go. So I can actually then go ahead and just carve back into it. In this case, actually, that's not too bad. But you can kind of quickly get some more variation that way, just by subtracting another stone. And maybe that's good. Maybe I'll just leave that. But don't forget to set that tool back to Z add, because that's probably what you're going to want to do most of the time. So, you know, again, just to break up tiling, maybe I could just subtract a little bit of it carefully. See, I don't want to affect the other stones around it, so it can be a little bit of a tricky thing to do. Doesn't always work, but sometimes a combination of these methods will do the trick. That's good enough. Just a little chip. So maybe that's enough just to break up all the variation. So you can erase completely and replace, or you can just sort of selectively add and subtract some other tools from that layer.